It's hard to create a character that will stand the test of time, even for the most talented. Siegel and Schuster's Superman is still around today, but who remembers their funny man? So, why not mine the classics for your funny books? Everyone knows who Dracula is. Just slap a comic with his name and likeness and people will flock to it. None of that messy setup required. While Alan Moore and Kevin O'Neill's League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is the foremost example in comics of the use of literary figures, today I want to look at the bizarre spectacle when such characters are made a part of already extant superhero universes. When one thinks of vampires, Dracula usually comes to mind pretty quickly. And yet, it took a little time for Marvel and DC to make use of vampires at all, let alone the king himself. The Comics Code Authority strictly prohibited scenes dealing with, or instruments associated with Walking Dead, torture, vampires and vampirism, ghouls, cannibalism and werewolfism. Marvel attempted to skirt this line with Morbius in Amazing Spider-Man 101, who invites all the comparisons of being a vampire, but refuses to define himself as such. An update to the Comics Code in 1971 changed this, stating, "Vampires, ghouls and werewolves shall be permitted to be used when handled in the classic tradition, such as Frankenstein, Dracula, and other high-caliber literary works written by Edgar Allan Poe, Saki, Conan Doyle, and other respected authors whose works are read in schools around the world." With this, comic publishers were given some room to represent a darker side of fiction. Marvel took this opportunity, creating characters such as Werewolf by Night and the Ghost Rider. In 1972, Gene Colan's Tomb of Dracula began publication, formally inserting the Count into the Marvel Universe. The series followed Frank Drake, Dracula's descendant. Frank's attempt at monetizing his ancestral castle leads to the revival of Dracula, who promptly begins biting necks. Working with Rachel Van Helsing and Quincy Harker, descendants of characters from the Bram Stoker novel, they engaged in a cat-of-mouse game with the Vampire Lord as he attempted to regain his power base. Dracula, meanwhile, found himself dealing with increasingly bizarre threats, ranging from brain-in-a-jar Dr. Sun to his own child turned angelic warrior Janus. Dracula met his ultimate fate in the final issue, with Quincy Harker destroying him in a massive explosion that took both their lives. Its presence in the Marvel Universe was made evident in a crossover with the Werewolf by Night series, and encounters with Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, and even the Silver Surfer. The series' biggest impact on the Marvel Universe is of course its introduction of Blade, the vampire hunter, who has since outgrown this humble beginning into movie stardom. Ice skating uphill indeed. Despite his death at the end of the series, Dracula would be resurrected again and again. Chris Claremont used him in his X-Men stories, where he joined the long list of supervillains who wanted to make Storm their queen. Dracula has remained a looming threat in Marvel, dying and returning several times over the course of the past few decades. He's proved a thorn in the sides of Deadpool, Apocalypse, and was a key player in 2024's Bloodhunt crossover, opposing the new King of Vampires, Blade. My favourite use of his after Tomb of Dracula came in Captain Britain and MI13, where he fired vampires at the UK from his castle on the moon. That's a sentence that can only exist in comic books. Conversely, DC has barely utilised the good Count. His most notable appearance there was in Superman 180, an amusing homage to the classic horror movies by Jeff Loeb and Ian Churchill. Dracula lures Superman to his home in an attempt to gain his power to protect against General Zod's incursions from neighbouring Pokolistan. However, it ends abruptly when, after biting Superman, Dracula explodes. Turns out, when you have a weakness to sunlight, solar-powered blood isn't a good meal. DC's vampire world has largely been represented by Andrew Bennett, better known as I, Vampire. In the 60s, Marvel had versions of Frankenstein's monster make a couple of appearances. A robot duplicate bedeviled the X-Men, left on Earth by aliens and whose rampage Professor X theorises may have inspired Mary Shelley's novel. Meanwhile, Victor Frankenstein's descendant used the Silver Surfer's power cosmic to awaken his own unliving creation. As part of the aforementioned relaxation of the Comics Code, in the 70s Marvel put out an adaptation of the novel, then a few original tales set in the 1800s. While these stories by Gary Friedrich and Mike Ploog were well received, Eventually the title took the monster into the present day of 1974, and the stories lost their edge. In an interview with the Comics Journal, Plug describes how he really enjoyed working on a Frankenstein feature, and only left due to editorial pressures. Oddly enough, the only reason I left Frankenstein was the fact that they wanted to bring him into the 20th century. That's when I left it. I was really open to do anything after that, but I just couldn't handle bringing Frankenstein into the present and having him battle with Spider-Man. The idea of it even makes me weep today. The monster did indeed meet with Spider-Man in Marvel Team Up 36, but Spidey accepts the reality of this fictional character with surprising ease. He was in the midst of the infamous clone saga, and so already living through one science fiction story. Why should another be so hard to believe? The monster soon took the name Adam, and would make sporadic appearances. Most recently, he was recruited by Phil Coulson to join his Howling Commandos. DC's Frankenstein monster has undergone a few revisions, first appearing as something for Dr. 13 to debunk in the Phantom Stranger stories. More prominent is Grant Morrison and Doug Mankey's iteration, who debuted as part of the Seven Soldiers crossover event. This Frankenstein visually pays homage to the Boris Karloff version, but is evidently the monster of Shelley's novel. He quotes Paradise Lost at all opportunities, referencing one of his foundational texts from the book, and speaks in a somewhat florid prose. The stories lent heavily towards horror and science fiction, with sentient water taking its revenge, and teenagers used as birthing pods for malicious fairies. As Seven Soldiers comprised 7 different miniseries all intertwined in different ways, Morrison's version incorporates several parts of that greater meta-narrative. Victor Frankenstein was given the secret to reanimating flesh by Melmoth, former king of overarching antagonists, the Shida. With Melmoth's blood as the reviving agent, this makes Frankenstein akin to the Grundy Men, reanimated servants found in another of the Seven Soldiers series, Clarion the Witch Boy. Taking the name of his creator, Frankenstein undergoes several disturbing adventures, chasing Melmoth across the plains of Mars and fighting the Shida fairy folk in small-town America. He joins up with a government agency, the Superhuman Advanced Defense Executive, SHADE. In their employ is the Bride of Frankenstein, whose beehive hairdo is another reference to the classic Karloff films. After Seven Soldiers, Frankenstein would commonly appear working with SHADE. He appeared in The Final Crisis, part of the assault force on Bloodhaven, where his immunity to the god bacterium Mortococcus helped stall Darkseid's plans. His popularity was such that he even headlined one of the first series from the New 52, Frankenstein, Agent of SHADE, which lasted 17 issues. While not a constant presence, he still rears his green head every now and again, including a stint with the Justice League Dark.
Elementary, my dear Watson.
Moving away from horror, we have Sherlock Holmes. Given his influence on detective fiction, and that DC is named for Detective Comics, it stands to reason that Holmes would turn up there, and he has done so on a couple of occasions. In Eclipso number 8, a story titled The Case of the Seventh Sacrament by Robert Loren Fleming and Ted McKeever details Holmes' encounter with the Shadow Demon. While investigating the ravings of lawyer Godfrey Norton, Dr. Watson is possessed by Eclipso as he defends Holmes' life. While Sherlock deduces that sunlight is the demon's weakness, the case ends with the death of Irene Adler. Later, he helped Hawkman on a case in the 1940s, despite being well into his 90s. However, his biggest appearance came in Detective Comics 572, a 50th anniversary special. This issue brought together the main detective features of that title, Slam Bradley, the Elongated Man, and, of course, the Batman, in an adventure involving the descendants of both Dr. Watson and Moriarty. The disparate heroes work together to foil a plot to detonate nuclear weapons and kill the royal family by a Moriarty who wants the villainy of his name to reverberate throughout the centuries. At the conclusion of the tale, the group is congratulated by a very alive Sherlock Holmes, somehow still breathing due to a combination of Tibetan air and special honey. Marvel, however, has a slightly different take on the character. Destiny, charter member of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, has the civilian name of Irene Adler. Yes, like the Sherlock Holmes character. She worked with her lover, the shapeshifter Mystique, as detectives in 19th century London. Can you guess where this is going? Yeah, as formally revealed in Immortal X-Men 8 by Kieran Gillen and Michele Bandini, Mystique very explicitly operated her detective agency as Sherlock Holmes. Meanwhile, Spider-Man has yet to encounter her in this persona.
Are you so foolish as to believe that you can oppose the will of Fu Manchu?
Moving on to the world of pulp fiction now, we have the most famous example of Yellow Peril, Dr. Fu Manchu. Despite adorning several covers of Detective Comics before Batman made it his title, Fu Manchu never joined DC continuity, his last story published in Detective Comics 28. According to Wizard magazine, Fu Manchu's creator Sax Rohmer demanded high royalties for his use, but I can't find any corroborating evidence for that, so let me know in the comments if you have any evidence for either side of that claim. Marvel, hoping to cash in on the martial arts craze sweeping America in the 1970s, licensed the Fu Manchu novels from the Rohmer estate and used the Archfiend as the basis for the Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu comic series. The son of Fu Manchu, Shang-Chi forswore his father's plans after his first murder awakened him to their true evil nature. He joined the hero of the pulp novels, a now aged Sir Dennis Nayland Smith, and other members of MI6 in opposing Fu Manchu. In Giant-Sized Spider-Man 2, a team-up with Shang-Chi, the Wallcrawler couldn't believe that Fu Manchu is real, thinking him only a fictional character. His disbelief makes sense. His only previous interaction with anything Fu Manchu was the time when erstwhile roommate Harry Osborn very briefly sported a mustache, a Fu Manchu as he called it, in the 70s. The series ended with 125, and as the license was due to expire, so did Fu Manchu. Shang-Chi, however, was a completely Marvel creation, and so has continued to make further appearances. For quite a while, it became awkward to reference Shang-Chi's origins, given they couldn't say his father's name. It was usually "my evil father" or something equally non-committal. It wasn't until 2010's Secret Avengers 8 by Ed Brubaker and Mike Deodato that a solution finally appeared. While trying to stop his full resurrection, the Beast researches and discovers Fu Manchu's true name, Zheng Zhu. His previous names were simply a protective measure, as explained by the Prince of Orphans.
Crumb.
Marvel has had great success adapting Conan to the comics world. Its 1970s Conan the Barbarian ongoing a high seller, and the Savage Sword of Conan magazine lasting well into the 1990s, beyond most of Marvel's other magazine efforts. The Hyborian Age, that time of wizards and barbarians Conan inhabits, is firmly part of Marvel history. Set after the fall of Atlantis, Marvel created several characters for their Conan stories, as well as making use of other elements. The evil sorcerer Kulan Gath, while matching wits with Conan in his own series, also memorably transformed New York into his domain in Uncanny X-Men 191. The elder god Set, who was mentioned in the very first Conan story in 1932, was the central threat of the Atlantis Attacks crossover event, and his serpent crown has caused Namor some headaches in his time. Marvel Team-Up 79 has Mary Jane Watson possessed by the spirit of Red Sonja while on a date with Peter Parker, and they fight a returned Kulan Gath. But what of Conan himself? Besides some what-if stories, Conan largely kept to his own time. One appearance in Fantastic Four 405 has him pulled through time by Zarko the Tomorrow Man, but he is embarrassingly held in check by Ant-Man of all people. Marvel lost the rights to the Conan franchise in 2003, but regained them in 2018. In this second period of ownership, Conan became even more intertwined with the Marvel Universe, lost in time during the Avengers No Road Home event, winding up in the present day. He would even join the Savage Avengers for some reason. Marvel has since lost the rights once again, and does its best not to reference Conan by name anymore. Finally, we come to the urtext for the superhero genre, Philip Wiley's Gladiator. A novel detailing the creation of a super-strong, invulnerable man named Hugo Danner, it has long been theorised that this may have influenced Siegel and Schuster in the creation of Superman. It is in this light Gladiator is mostly remembered, as the prototype of the Superman, with the novel touching on several ideas that would be developed further as the superhero genre grew. Hugo Danner is the result of his father Abednego's experiments, the first of a new race of supermen who struggles to find his place in the world. The novel ends with Danner demanding an answer of the heavens, if there even is a place for beings like himself. A lethal lightning bolt responds, as if to say no. Hugo Danner is dead, and his father's notes, the means to create more superhumans, is destroyed. Roy Thomas seemed to make it his life's ambition to use this story in some fashion. An unfinished adaptation started in Marvel Preview 9 under the title Man God. His next crack at it would come in DC's Young All-Stars, a title set during World War II in the aftermath of the Crisis on Infinite Earths. As the rewriting of history meant there was no longer an Earth 2, and hence no longer an Earth 2 Superman, Batman or Wonder Woman active during the Second World War, new characters would be needed to fill the gaps in history their absence left. One of these, the Superman analogue, was Iron Munro, possessed of incredible strength and durability. The first hint of the Gladiator connection came when Munro battled the German superhuman Übermensch, who claimed descent from Abednego Danner's research in issue 6. In Young All-Stars 10, Munro comes across Hugo Danner's journal, and the issue effectively retells the novel's plot. However, it changes the ending, with Danner's death by lightning bolt a deliberately planted fiction. The following issue has Munro return home, and his mother, Danner's former high school sweetheart, tells of what happened next, of Hugo's brief return to his hometown of Indian Creek. After an encounter that would result in the birth of Iron Munro 9 months later, he left for parts unknown. Young All-Stars 28 has Munro on an expedition with another character descended from literary origins, Georgia Challenger. If her surname sounds familiar, that's because she's the granddaughter of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Professor Challenger. Yep, this is a 2-for-1, as Roy Thomas ties in Conan Doyle's lost world of dinosaurs and prehistoric beasts into DC's continuity with this story. Guided only by a photo of Hugo Danner atop a defeated dinosaur, Munro seeks out his missing father. Hugo Danner had made his way to the South American Maple Whiteland, the same one from the first Professor Challenger novel, and became a god to the Akala tribespeople living there. Using his father's research, he created the first of his race of supermen, his Sons of Dawn, named for a line from the novel, ready to shape the world. Thomas took one of the novel's themes to heart, that despite the incredible powers Danner held, he couldn't really effect lasting change in the world. Much as with most superhero comics, he can only really work as a firefighter, stopping injustices he comes across, but unable to improve things at the systemic level. His appearance in Young All-Stars shows the sad ending of this line of thought, as he plans for his superhuman children to lay waste to the world, a world that always disdained him for his superiority and his attempts to help. His Sons of Dawn are opposed by the full might of the All-Star Squadron, and a massive fight ensues. While the collected superheroes hold their own, they're no match for Danner's offspring. As Munro and Danner engage in Oedipal conflict, the Sons of Dawn begin weakening. The Akala peoples, isolated from our common germs in their remote part of the world, succumb to the case of the sniffles brought by Georgia Challenger. In a Wellesian twist, the common cold defeated the Sons of Dawn. Danner, seeing his legacy ended so quickly, succumbs to despair, once again confronted with a world that has no place for him. He leaps into an exploding factory, ending his life. While Danner himself may have died, his legacy did live on in a sense. Iron Munro would remain a member of the All-Star Squadron, and his granddaughter, Kate Spencer, inherited a portion of his durability, fighting crime as the latest manhunter. So, that's a whole load of random characters from fiction inserted into the superhero world. You might be wondering, why do authors seem so keen to do this? We could see it as a chance to play with favourites, the same economy which brings new writers to the superhero comic world. If you enjoyed Sherlock Holmes novels, why not have him match wits with DC's great detectives? Alternatively, wouldn't it be cool if Spider-Man fought Dracula? Yeah, run with it. A more cynical reason would be that creator ownership is a very thorny part of comics creation, even to this day. Comics history is littered with the corpses of creators, fighting to their dying breath for an ounce of restitution from the corporations made fat off their work. Just ask Jack Kirby or Bill Finger. Many creators are naturally reluctant to give up their intellectual property in exchange for so little. Why not use something somebody else already made? One name that's come up in this video is Roy Thomas. Being a former English teacher, he is acquainted with the classics, and so probably wanted a crack at playing with some of his inspirations. It was his hand that led Marvel to acquire the Conan license, introduced Frankenstein's monster to the pages of the X-Men, and brought Hugo Danner into the DC universe. It's also worth pointing out that most of these were brought in during his time at Marvel, and his reluctance to create original characters there due to poor creative rights compared with DC at the time. These insertions can feel artificial. Conan joining the Avengers stinks of corporate marketing nonsense, the slamming of action figures together, to say nothing of the seemingly mandatory meetings with Spider-Man during the 1970s. There's only so many times you can say, "Isn't that just a fictional character?" before you have to stop being surprised, Spider-Man. For the more entrenched characters, it can be an opportunity to use the familiar names to be a little experimental. Morrison and Mankey's Frankenstein is free of the moribund musings of the monster's usual depictions, a warrior poet of grim vengeance. Marvel's Dracula has moved on from Colan's Jack Palance-inspired design to a more unique appearance, a distinct vision of what the vampire lord looks like for Marvel. These both feel a lot more organic to the universes they inhabit than the simple transplantations described previously. What do you think? Are you a fan of the inclusion of pre-established fictional figures in superhero mythology? Are there any that I didn't cover which you feel are worthy of note? Start the conversation in the comments, and I'll see you next time.